Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Neil Howard, here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you so much for joining us again. Going to be speaking with Dr. Jeremy Levin. He's chairman of the Global Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO, and chairman and CEO of OVID Therapeutics Incorporated. He's joining us here on the program to talk about his perspective on vaccinations and his open letter to members of the biopharmaceutical industry. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Jeremy Levin.
Neil, it's a pleasure.
Give our listeners a bit of your background and then talk about your role there as chairman of the Global Biotechnology Innovation Organization.
You bet. I am an immigrant to the United States. I came here over 30 years ago. Family fled South Africa at the time of apartheid, and we ended up in the United Kingdom, where I finished my MD and my PhD. Both of those I practiced as a doctor around the world. And then before coming here in my early 30s, and since then have been growing up in the pharmaceutical industry. I've led one of the largest companies in that area, in generic companies, and then came back down to Earth and decided to to work with patients who really needed help, patients who had diseases of the brain that nobody was trying to cure. And that's what I'm doing in OVID right now.
These diseases of the brain, are we talking brain cancers or other types of diseases of the brain?
No, Neil, we're talking about inherited diseases of the brain. Ones where the mother is pregnant, perhaps their first pregnancy, it's a lovely opportunity, and then the child gets born and they don't know what's wrong with it, and then suddenly things start to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And these diseases are rare. There are about 23,000 families in the country, with the one that we're about to find a new medicine for, we hope. And that's called Angelman's. We have our final trial after 6 years of hard work. We're this year hopefully going to find the first ever medicine that makes a difference to these kids. And so that's one. It's tough for the families, very tough for the families.
Top of everyone's mind, of course, is this horrific pandemic that we find ourselves fighting right now. Many companies are in trials trying to find a vaccine. What is your perspective on vaccines, especially now during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Neil, vaccines work. While I'm working on my brain disease company, which is important to me, I also decided to lean in and help the industry solve for this pandemic. The industry is a strategic asset for this nation. And we noticed at the beginning of January this year that, in fact, our administration was ignoring it. And we knew it was going to be bad. So the industry leaned in. And they weren't only inventing they were inventing a number of different things. At the beginning of the year, there were no programs whatsoever. But Bio brought everybody together and we said, let's have a try to sort of bend the curve here, stop this pandemic. We need to take a leadership role. And from then to now, we have 700 programs. Over 300 of those are focused in completely new medicines. Over 150 of them are new vaccines. Vaccines work. You and I know that. They stop terrible things like measles, mumps, rubella. And hopefully now we'll be able to, with the efforts of the industry, get the right vaccine, and based on science and medicine, determine that it's safe and effective, and then bring that to everybody in America and the world.
You know, this pandemic, many believe and see that it's been extremely politicized from the outset. That has affected public trust in healthcare providers, the world leaders, as far as, the World Health Organization, the CDC, any organization worldwide. Trust is a huge issue now. I understand that you wrote an open letter to the members of the biopharmaceutical industry outlining how public health and the public's trust in new medical products, such as vaccines, are dependent upon the integrity, transparency, and objective assessment of new data as that data emerges. Talk about that idea during this time.
Neil, I started a book and wrote a book and published a book on this to begin with in June. That was just, what are we doing about this pandemic? Then as the time went on from June, we noticed that the politicization was dramatically changing the equation. Suddenly, people were talking about pandemic as if it was a political problem. It's not. It was a medical and science problem, and we need to tackle it as such. The more we talked about politically, the more we were watching public trust erode. The more we denied that it was a huge problem, the more deaths we were seeing, and the more people were being infected. And people were just treating it as an offhand event in some parts of the country. Finally, all of the chairmen of Bio, the ones who'd been preceded me, and my vice chairman decided we had to take a stand. It was moral. We're all American. We believe fundamentally that America needs to take a stand on this. And what we wanted to say was very clear and simple. Let science and medicine take the lead. We will solve for this. Please remove any political influence on the CDC, the FDA, and any decision-making on manufacturing that is required. Let the companies do what they do best. They will do it. And we hope that that had an impact. A week later, we were delighted to see all of the major companies who were developing vaccines, all of whom are very ethical, immediately subscribe to these same principles. And then even more encouraging was that the FDA put a very clear set of guidelines out for everybody to understand, which allowed everybody in the industry at least to understand. The industry, our key partner, the FDA, were all looking at this with the same eye. Mm-hmm. It was going to be science and medicine. Now we need to work with the public.
You know, you talked about earlier this year joining with some of the top leaders in biopharma. You mentioned your book, Biotechnology in the Time of COVID-19, Commentaries from the Front Line. Talk a bit about this book and briefly one of the main takeaways from this publication.
It's real simple. The publication is 47 essays by leading CEOs in our industry. We looked at in absolute concern as the administration proceeded not to treat this with science and medicine. So as we all pivoted within our industry, we felt that we ought to ought to capture that moment for history. And so over a matter of 2-3 weeks only, we published that book. Actually, it took a month in total. So there were 47 essays which describe the efforts and the moment that each one of these CEOs foresaw something that needed to be done and stepped forward to do it completely spontaneously. And because of that, we were able to bring together not just those people in the book, and they describe their stories. Some describe how they feel. They don't describe their technologies. They describe their feeling at that moment. It's very personal. One, for example, describes a letter that he wrote to his grandchild about this moment. Another describes how he was sitting in Paris talking to some of his sales team and investigators, and then getting the call and riding straight back to America to start finding a medicine, and how horrified we were. Myself, I was in Cambodia on what I thought was going to be a dream holiday, and there we were in Angkor Wat, not Angkor Wat. We were in the heart of Cambodia, and suddenly, looking around us in the Temple of Doom, the one you see on the movies, there were no tourists. There were no tourists. Nobody. No Chinese. And people were wearing masks. The country was deserted, and I knew at that moment something very bad was coming for America, and so I returned. And all of these are captured in the books. It's very human, but it's about what we felt at the time.
Where can we get some more information about Bio, about OVID Therapeutics, and where can we get a copy of Biotechnology in the Time of COVID-19?
Well, if you want to read and listen, and I get a great source of information about the COVID-19 and the vaccines, bio.org is the website for the Biotechnology Organization. It's got a website which looks specifically at this, and it actually will give you huge amounts of data, which is really understandable. If you want to seek out the book. It's on ebooks, it's on Amazon, and you can easily download a copy of that. All the proceeds from that book, I get nothing out of it. It all goes to research into the genetics of new diseases. Can we find new medicines for it? And then if you want to find out about OVID, it's OVID RX, OVID RX.com. Do go there, see what about the families and see what the families experience. And the diseases, Angelman's, Fragile X, CDKL9, Dup15q, diseases that you've hardly heard of, but cause great concern.
Well, I appreciate your time this evening, Jeremy, and I'm hoping that we'll talk again.
Neil, it's a complete pleasure. Anytime. Be a real pleasure. I think the more you do your work, the better we all understand what needs to be done to fight off and defeat the pandemic.
Thank you very much. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com, Health Professional Radio.